Today we're talking about the pros and cons of buying versus renting. I'm a realtor, so you probably think I'm just going to convince you to buy and try to sell you on that, but I'm not. I promise. I'm going to give it to you straight. Let's get into it. How's it going, my friends? My name is Jesse Lynch, and I work with the hardest working real estate team in the game. We're called Welcome to Denver. You can check out our website, welcometodenver.co, as in Colorado. Very clever. But this YouTube channel is all about helping you find a place to call home, a place to land here in beautiful Denver, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, the Front Range, whatever it is. And that's whether you're buying a house for the first time or relocating here from a different city, state, country, or planet. Sometimes both. Relocations, first-time home buyers. That's what we do, and that's what we do better than anybody else. So if either of those two things appeal to you, then do us both a favor. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell to get notified, give the video a thumbs up, and leave a comment. You can say, "Sup, dude?" That's fine. Truly, that will get a thumbs up all day from me. So I would appreciate that very much. And it's not just for the sake of a comment. Truly, the thumbs up, the engagement is helpful not only to the video, not only to the channel, but other folks like yourself who are potentially trying to buy a house here, trying to move here. You know what I mean? And if that is you, if you are waiting in the wings, thinking about doing either one, then I would implore you to get a hold of us. And we will crush it for you. We will kill it for you. We will work our butts off for you and make it as easy as possible on you. And you will be glad you did. You can go to our website, welcometodenver.co. We have a contact form there. You can fill it out, piece of cake. Or you can shoot us an email directly to info@welcometodenver.co. They lead to the same inbox, which is mine. So whatever. Do whatever you want. You got options. Today's video, we are basically talking through the pros and the cons of buying versus renting in the Denver area. You might think that I'm just going to try to convince you to buy. Well, I'm not. Let's get into it. Okay, I'm going to start with the benefits of renting. That seems like the opposite of maybe what you'd think I would do. So that's why I'm doing it. Basically, I won't deny that there are some benefits to renting that you cannot get by buying. But it's kind of up to you. I'm going to try to lay it out there. Maybe you've never considered buying. Maybe you don't know what these benefits are or whatever. You know, I'm going to lay it out and do my best to sort of give you a full picture into, what it's all about. So to me, the first benefit of renting, right? And to me, this is pretty undeniable, is flexibility, right? You don't have to commit to a spot, right? Like an area right away. You can sign a 6-month lease, a 1-month lease, whatever, and I guess 2-year lease, whatever you want to do. If you decide after the lease is up that you are no longer into living in that area, cool. You can split, right? You can go to a totally different area of the metropolitan area. You can go to a totally different state. If you are unsure about where you're going to end up, then very often just renting is the move, right? Because there's like an uncertainty, which actually we'll get to that later. The uncertainty, that's a thing. So we'll get to that. But yeah, if you are uncertain about where you're trying to be, what your ambitions are, where you're trying to end up, then yeah, probably renting is the move with a few caveats. I think I can get to that later. Basically, it depends on how long that uncertainty is. If you're looking at like 3 to 5 year uncertainty, then I would maybe consider buying if it's within your means and the other pros and cons don't outweigh. The next benefit, as I see it, is that it's easier to qualify for, potentially. I mean, some of y'all might just be perfectly qualified, so that doesn't really fall into your category. But I guess just on average, if your financial situation, if your credit situation is not as good, then you'll have an easier time, renting. Because you could also, break it down, you could rent a room. That's considerably cheaper. You can't buy a room, right? So depending on your financial situation, it's just easier to qualify for. I do not think that this should repeal anybody from buying, to be honest, but the credit check is going to typically be a soft check. So that's sort of a benefit, except that you're getting a credit check for something that you don't own. right? That'd be like if every time you rented a car, you had to get a credit check, right? Kind of dumb, but nonetheless, obviously, it's like I get why a landlord wants to do a credit check, but from the standpoint of it being a major benefit because it's a soft check, I don't know. That's not really that much of a benefit. But different side of the same sort of rental coin is I guess it's a con of renting, but is the damage deposit sort of hustle, right? Of like you put some in, if like something gets marred up on the wall, which is again I think is probably pretty fair to landlords, but it's like you give a damage deposit, then when you move out, potentially some of that damage deposit has dwindled because of whatever XYZ, maybe a friend did something, and then you move out. Now you have to come up with a little more money to cover the next damage deposit. Yeah, so that can be a vicious cycle. But I guess I would say if that sort of cycle of the damage deposit thing, it has you super tight, then your financial situation is probably not such that you can afford a home. But I guess that is not the case, bar none. And maybe you just find it annoying anyways. Maybe it just feels like an unnecessary expense. At which point, totally reasonable. And I would definitely say that is a con. Next pro about renting, as far as I see it, is that you can potentially afford nicer finishes in a nicer area, right? And I guess you could make the same argument for like owning a condo potentially compared to owning a home. But I would say there are just certain areas that maybe renters are more prone to live in, maybe they're a little more happening. But to buy a home in those areas a lot of the time is like prohibitively expensive, like considerably more expensive per month, even if you're buying a condo, than to rent an apartment. So for that, to me, that's one of the best arguments. I think maybe I have one other argument that competes with it, but that is definitely one of the best arguments of like, well, I want to live here and I can't afford a home, but I can afford, an apartment. So that said, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're renting a single family home, then typically it's cheaper. If it's cheaper to rent, it's probably either it's not as nice of a home or the landlord isn't doing very well because they're not making enough back. Typically it's going to be, I guess, this maybe is a blanket statement that doesn't apply to a bunch of areas, but typically like renting a single family home ought to be more than the lease would be, or than the rent payments would be. Okay, and then this one doesn't apply to every rental situation, but I guess one potential positive or benefit of renting can be that sometimes there are things that are called gross rents, which it sort of includes all of the utilities, right? So name a utility: trash, water, sewage, gas, electricity, those things, and sometimes cable or internet or something like that, and sometimes they're wrapped all into the lease. And the benefit of that, it's typically doesn't mean it's cheaper, right? Usually that's sort of like included in the higher price, but the benefit of that could be that it's potentially easier to budget every month, right? If every month your rent is the same, cool. But although, another caveat, I apologize for all the caveats, but this is a caveat-filled video. What are you going to do? That caveat being that your rent might include all that stuff, but in a year, your rent might just go up. So while it's easier to budget in that 1 year, and maybe you can still budget for an increase in the next year, it still just can change on you, which I guess could happen with utilities if you're owning a house, but I would say not to the same degree, typically. And then I'm going to say that this is the last pro, and arguably the best pro about renting is that you are not messing with anything, right? You have a leak, you have the electric stop working, unless it's because you stopped paying, of course. But it's like you have problems on the home, on the building, on the unit. It's not your problem. Ultimately, to me, that is the reason to do it, right? Maybe you have like a work situation where you're just like, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. Then cool, that's probably a decent argument for rentals. But again, it could be potentially a good argument for a condo or townhome, as those are typically lower maintenance things, which, by the way, we have a video on what should I buy, condo, townhome, or single family home, that potentially may be of interest to you. You should check it out. I'll do my best to put a link down there. Otherwise, you can look on the channel. Yeah, I like how I'm like, no promises on the remembering to put a link in. Okay, moving on to the pros, the benefits of owning a home. Number one, it's gonna kind of sound like what I said at the beginning, which was like flexibility. This is kind of a different thing, which is independence. Independence from the renter game, and basically like independence to do what you please with your home. Now, you won't be able to run a taco shop out of your kitchen, right? Or potentially, I don't know, like a machinery shop out of your basement. Those things you might have problems with zoning and the likes, like running a commercial spot out of your home. But if your child wants to paint their room pink, no problem, it's your house. Go ahead and do it. If you want to paint your room all black, go ahead, do it. I guess this isn't all black, but you know. If you want to put a cactus in the front yard, or if you want to put, I don't know, a reindeer on the roof, go ahead. You know, it's your life, it's your house, you can do it. Obviously, within the law, you can't cook meth, you know, out of the house. Again, that would be illegal, but yeah, you have sort of the flexibility, the freedom to do with the home as you please within the law. Which brings me to my second benefit of owning, and I think this is a pretty good one. It's that you have the ability to adjust your home, improve your home, expand your home, or expand the living space, again within the law, within permitting laws and whatever. This is lawyer Jesse talking here. I should get a suit just for lawyer Jesse. I'm kidding, I don't really do suits. But so basically, you can, if your life demands it, if your living situation demands it, if your familial status demands it, you can add living space, right? If you happen to have some unfinished space in your home, an attic or a basement, you could finish that, right? And you could add space to it. But if you didn't, you could add an addition onto the back or onto the side, or I guess you could chop the roof off and put in another story. That's definitely a thing people do. And obviously, like, not everybody's going to do that. But if you find yourself in a situation where you don't want to move, right? Your kid, maybe you have kids, they're all settled in, they're going to school, they love the school, they love their friends, but you have an in-law or a grandparent who needs to move in, and you need an extra 150 square feet for a bedroom, or 300 square feet for a little studio space or something. Well, if you were renting, you would be in Barney. Bonus points if you have any idea what that means. Barney Rubble, trouble. Yeah, cool. So dumb. Yeah, basically the ability to expand the home as needed and not uproot your, base, your group of people that you're living with, your family or whatever. Which brings me to which brings me to the next benefit, which I'm just going to call like home stability, right? Like you have a stable home base, which is, for one, very beneficial for children, development and whatever. It's just good for their mental health to not have to worry about that. That said, don't feel guilty if you have to move for reasons. Obviously, like, people move. So, I guess to some degree it's helpful to children, but obviously I think everybody knows that, like, a sense of stability is helpful to children. But it's also helpful to a person to not have to move, to not have the fear of eviction, like riding over them. And it's not always just eviction. Sometimes just a landlord just is deciding to sell or whatever, right? So, but it's not like you have to mess up. Sometimes your lease is just up. So the stability, though, of just knowing where home is, and, for children, going to the same school, growing up around the same kids, or generally the same kids, there's a benefit to that I would say is pretty undeniable. On basically that same note, I'm going to say financial stability, which I know those are pretty similar things, but to me they're kind of broken up into two things. One would be like for emotional, and I guess financial, there's emotions there too, but it's more just like the sort of technicality of it. And the financial stability, the beauty, this is one of the best parts of, to me this is where it starts to get like juicy. You know what I mean? Like, basically, it's for one, I think of it sort of as a hedge against inflation, and maybe that makes no sense to you. Apologies, but basically, like, historically, costs go up like this. Home prices go up like this. Rental prices go up like this, right? So if you can buy a home here, cool, right? That's like, you buy a home here, this is what your mortgage costs, cool, because in 5 years it's up here, and that's more expensive. So basically, you're a little bit protected against rising prices. Your payments might change a little bit as insurance costs creep up, but they're not that crazy, unless you live, I guess, in a forest fire risk area, flood zone, something like that. Those can be a little more expensive, but still, I don't think they're rising quite as precipitously. I could be wrong about that. When I think about forest fire stuff, I'm like, yeah, man, I don't know, maybe that is rising precipitously. However, if you buy a home right now and home prices go up, it's all good. You're generally paying the same amount of money in your principal and interest, which that's kind of another video, but your mortgage payments are going to stay the same, which provides a degree of stability. And arguably, I guess this isn't true for everybody, but should allow you to have more disposable income as time goes on, right? Because in theory, as inflation goes up, your pay will go up. But if you can lock in, think about if you could own a car, you could buy a car right now and own it for the rest of time, and those payments would never go up. That would be pretty comfortable. You would be like, well, I don't ever have to worry about my car. And before somebody's like, get a Toyota or something like that, cool. I already made the joke, so congratulations. But yeah, it basically, you can lock that in, and then as time goes on, in 20 years, you think rent prices are going to be the same? No, rent prices are going to be way more in 20 years. That's, real Nostradamus there. Fundamentally, though, that sort of locking that in, to me, is one of the greatest benefits of it. It's a protection long term. Again, it's a hedge against inflation, but even if it is a little tighter, maybe the mortgage is slightly more than what you're paying for rent right now, I would argue that in 5 years, your situation theoretically will improve, but your mortgage will stay the same, which will free up some money for you. So yeah, that makes sense? I think that makes sense. Okay, and then the next benefit to me, this is a big one, and this is one that I'm fairly passionate about, so I apologize, I might get a little too rowdy about it, but basically it's the ability to participate in equity. And what is equity? Equity is fundamentally the difference between what you owe on the home and what the home is worth. This whole area, that's equity, right? So I've known tons of people, we've helped people who buy a home for this, whatever sort of down payment they make, technically that's equity. So if you're doing 3% down, 5% down, 20% down, 50% down, technically that would be equity, but that's just money out of your pocket. So I don't really see that as a major benefit. But as you are paying down your mortgage, you're paying your mortgage every month. Here's the deal. If you're paying for rent, you're paying for a mortgage. It's just not your mortgage. It's your landlord's mortgage, right? So no matter what, you're making those payments. Either it's going into rent and to your landlord's mortgage pay down, or it's going into your mortgage pay down. So basically, every month, every year, you're paying a certain amount of your mortgage down. At the beginning of a mortgage, it tends to be weighted more heavily towards interest, and then as time goes on, you're paying more of the principal, right? That's how amortization works. Maybe I can make another video. I don't know. Maybe that made enough sense. If you want me to make a video on that, I guess leave a comment and I can do my best to explain in a greater detail how amortization works. Fundamentally, though, you're paying into this thing every month, and what you owe on the loan, it's like a car loan. It probably makes sense, but what you owe on the loan gets reduced every month. So even if the home price stayed exactly the same, every month you get a little bit more equity in the home, and that equity is technically yours. That equity is, your net worth. It's added to basically, what you have available to you. Not that you can just go spend your equity, but more on that later. So there's just loan pay down, which I think is the most obvious, most fundamental version of equity. It's basically, instead of paying your rent, you're paying your own mortgage down, the equity grows. First of all, if you understand this fully, I mean no disrespect. There's definitely some people out there who don't understand this part of it. So basically, you buy for this, you owe this is equity, and then the value goes up, right? As time goes on, the home price goes up. And just it's typically, not all the time, big time disclosure, the market doesn't always go up over short term. Historically, it has always gone up over the long term, but obviously everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but most people remember 2007, which, the market took a big crash, and there was a time where home prices were down, and for a few years too. So it's not that it always goes down. So it's not that it literally always constantly goes up and can never go down, but over time, over the long term, it goes up. So as home prices go up, so too does your equity. Then you could potentially sell that home, take all that equity, put it towards a down payment on a different home, and potentially be able to afford more because you're maybe going to have a more favorable loan type because you have all the down payment, etc. Potentially you have so much equity that you can go buy a house cash and then you don't have a payment, but you probably would have to downgrade because home prices went up over that time. But it's definitely doable and potentially something to consider in terms of retirement, right? Personally, And then part of the equity thing, this is sort of another benefit, but I'm going to sort of squeeze it into the equity situation, is you can borrow against that equity, which is a very powerful thing depending on what you want to do with it. It could be a really dumb thing, right? You could be like, I'm going to go buy a boat. I don't know why boats are always used as the example of dumb things to buy. They're not always dumb things to buy. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes it saves you money because you're not going out to the bar or something, So I don't know why that's just seemed like the best example of it. But so basically, you have all the equity. You can go to the bank or whatever, and you can get a home equity loan, which is depends on how much equity you have. You have to have a certain amount of equity to say, okay, I want this chunk of the equity. I would like that available to me in the form of credit. Typically, it's like lower interest rate than the likes of like a credit card, like a lot lower typically. And you could buy a boat, which again, I could rant on. You could buy a car if you had to. If some unexpected life emergency came up, you could use it and potentially, be way more comfortable. I guess in theory, you could probably pay your mortgage if you had to, right? If you just were in a situation, I don't know if that's true, but I believe you could. It's fundamentally a credit card. But if you're in a situation where you were like just drowning but you knew it was temporary, then potentially you could do something like that. But anything, medical bills, whatever, moving your mother-in-law or something, it doesn't matter. Any kind of life emergency, you could borrow against the home, have a chunk of money available to you at a considerably lower rate than a credit card, and use that money and sort of bail yourself out. But you could also, and this is to me where it gets, again, juicy. I don't know why I'm using that word today. I probably won't ever again. So enjoy it while it lasts. But you can take that money, that equity that's available to you in the form of like a home equity line of credit or however, a cash out refi or something like that. You could take that money and spend it on a down payment for another home or a rental home or something like that. Or the home you're living in could remain a rental home. You have all that equity in it. You could take that equity, buy yourself another home, right? And then you could repeat. You could rinse and repeat. And you could eventually have a rental portfolio and, you could be Warren Buffett. Maybe not. He probably had more money than that, but he probably wasn't just doing that. But yeah, nonetheless, you could amass a portfolio and participate in equity on multiple homes and see the benefit of being a landlord and all that, which again is a whole other video. But one last thing that I want to talk about, to me that's like the main benefits of rental versus owning. But one last thing that I want to talk about, and this is something that as we talk to clients who reach out to us, almost always through YouTube. So if you're watching this wondering if you'd be weird to reach out, literally no. We get pretty much all of our clients this way. So you're pretty normal if you do that. And thank you for thinking about it. Thank you if you do. We love y'all. But I want to talk about the idea of risk, right? We have plenty of people who say they're risk averse, So they're afraid to get into the home market. And again, the last thing I want to do is feel salesy, but this is, and that's like that is not my thing. You know, to be salesy is something that I try to avoid at every turn. But when there's people who talk about being risk averse, so they are hesitant to get into the home market. But let me just like run by sort of this idea of risk and how I think it's misguided. For one, okay, if you can get into a home for 3% down, which you can, sometimes even less if you're using a down payment assistance program. So keep that in mind. We have other videos on that. But if you get into a home for 3% down, that's not a crazy amount of money. I mean, it can be. Obviously, I respect that for some people it is. But the risk there is either the 3% that you put down, either you have that in the bank and it feels good to have it in the bank, or you put it down on a home and there's some inherent risk there, I guess, right? But for one, your money is basically losing value when it sits in the bank. Again, a totally other video. And I don't even know if that video will ever exist on this channel. That's like a more, I don't know, like investor Grant Cardone kind of thing. But basically, what I'm trying to get at is there is a risk in waiting, right? For one, the risk, let's say your financial situation is stable, right? You have a job that's stable, but jobs don't typically give super good raises, right? It's not super common. I mean, not that you couldn't go out and get another job and find yourself in a better spot in 3 years. That's cool. And actually, that's something that I would say, if you do think in a year you're about to be in a much better financial position, like much better. I don't mean like a, 1% raise, maybe one, yeah, right? I don't mean a small raise that is just going to basically cover the cost of inflation. I mean, you're going to be in a dramatically better spot. Then that could be an argument for waiting, right? Because maybe you are really close to being able to afford like truly the home you want. Okay, there's an argument there. But when the idea of risk, of waiting to avoid risk, unless you are in a very, very tight financial spot and all you can afford is like a fixer-upper, like big-time fixer-upper, and so you're going to be tight, you're going to have no cash when you move in, and then you're going to inherit a home that like is on its like shaky legs, okay, there is some risk there. But if you just are risk-averse and you think it sounds risky to buy, the idea that there's not more risk in waiting is something that I don't think enough people think about. In waiting a year, there are markets like all over the world in the last 2 years that have gone up like by 50%, right? A ton of them. And that's an extreme number, but a bunch of markets went up by 20%, 25%. So this idea of like, let me just ride this out and then next year or 2 years from now, I'll buy. The reality is those homes, almost for sure, the home that you are looking at now that you could afford but seems risky, you are not going to be able to afford. Because for the most part, caveat town, for the most part, those prices are going up higher than people's wage increases. Okay, to me that's like again, that I could probably talk on that for a while. Maybe I will make another video on that. Where it's a little more refined and I'm talking just to that idea because I feel like I could talk about it for a long time. But it's something that I want you to consider is the risk higher for waiting? Okay, let's just put that out there, let you think about it, wrap your head around the market and the changes in your financial situation. That's a very important thing to weigh. And I realize that some of you are watching this and you're thinking, I know all this stuff. This is so obvious. This is just a fluff piece. This is just filler track. I swear to God it's not. I swear we are answering a question that we get in comments and in actual real life. Like, what are the benefits? So I'm making this video for folks who are actually curious about that. And I'm willing to bet that some of you know-it-alls out there also have not actually considered the risk thing in the same way that I just mentioned it. So if you are like a first-time home buyer who's actually watching this stuff to like get educated on the matter, or if maybe you're somebody relocating here who's just kind of going down the rabbit hole of these videos, thanks for being here. I hope this video at least has been enjoyable, and we would absolutely love it if you would get a hold of us and reach out to us, and we will crush it for you. We will work our butts off for you. So you can go to our website, welcometodenver.co. We have a contact form there. You can fill it out. Take 30 seconds. I swear, at least if you know your email, your phone number, your first and last name. Hopefully you know those things. If you don't, I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, you can fill it out. It'll be a piece of cake. Or you can shoot us an email directly to info@welcometodenver.co. Just depends on how much information you want to put on there. But we'll take care of you. We'll do the best. We'll be the best. We are the best. Thanks for watching. As always, if you're new here, welcome, first of all. As you exit the video, please do so safely. Subscribe to the channel and click that bell to get notified every time we put out tremendous videos like the ones you're seeing right now. And give the video a thumbs up. Say, a thing. You can say a thing in the comments. You can type a thing, period. Send it out. I'd appreciate that. It will get a thumbs up from me. Maybe even that heart thing, which I didn't even realize YouTube had until I started doing these videos. So, thank you for watching. We did it. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.